This paper is called Eulogy of Place, Investigating and Performing the Transmission of Ecological Grief. In my hometown, our community and infrastructure is built on great but secret acts of heroism, acts which allowed Canada to elevate its status on the global market. My research began at the end of my third year of university, when I queried why the village of people who raised me are silent about our local history, despite its unbelievable accounts. After investigating my local history, I noticed experiences of ecological grief resided in testimonies of the past. Due to current climate catastrophes, the importance of managing ecological grief is escalating. The stress caused by climate change threats make literacy of ecological grief paramount, so establishing spaces for communal discussions about this type of grief is crucial. By exploring issues of ecological justice using applied theater techniques, researchers can not only gain a critical perspective on the data, but they also foster practices which strengthen an Earth-human symbiotic relationship. My hometown of Iroquois is located on the Saint Lawrence River, a river which houses the 3,700-kilometer Seaway waterway system. Historian Claire Parham states that this system was an international construction endeavor between the United States and Canada. It was built to transfer goods by cargo ship from the Atlantic Ocean to Lake Superior, as well as produce hydroelectricity. South Stormont historians Clive and Francis Marin write that at 8 a.m. on the 1st of July in 1958, also known as Inundation Day, the Coffer Dam near Cornwall, Ontario was destroyed. With this action, the Canadian and American governments finalized their creation of a new St. Lawrence River. American writer Carlton Mabey says that these governments drowned 38,000 acres of fertile land, whereupon 6,500 Ontarians had lived prior to their expropriation in the name of economic progress. Marin and Marin point out that the lost villages of Altsville, Farrens Point, Dickinson's Landing, Wales, Moulinet, and Millrush, along with the relocated villages of Iroquois and Morseburg, were displaced by flooding that was necessary for the construction of the Seaway. All of these villages existed directly on the riverbank. Several committees were formed to construct the megaproject, including Ontario Hydro, the Power Authority of the State of New York, the Canadian Seaway Authority, and the United States Seaway Development Corporation. These committees were also in charge of rehabilitation, which was the process of expropriating people from their homes and relocating them to new town sites away from the river. Because I grew up in Iroquois, I have connections with the president of a local historical society. She referred me to residents of our community who are knowledgeable about the Seaway or witnessed its construction. When I reached out to potential participants, I noticed many of them were comforted to learn I grew up in Iroquois. I suspect my positionality established a foundational level of trust, which would have been absent otherwise. I interviewed 10 residents of settler background, and the duration of each interview was 30 to 60 minutes. I audio recorded all of the interviews and then transcribed them. I searched for frequent topics addressed by expropriated residents, whom I will refer to as river people. I noticed they vividly recounted ecological losses. Their recollections included topics like the loss of the Long Sioux Rapids, their favorite trees and the destruction of trees, excavation, soil contamination, riverside proximity and river access, habitat loss, and human death. I compiled the participants' direct quotations into a script organized by topic. I worked with a cast of 4 peers to analyze, question, and mount the script in the months of January through March of 2020, when our process was halted by COVID-19. I did not consider the script to be a final product, but instead a summary of transcripts intended to be the groundwork for a devised play. My construction of this initial draft of the script was for time efficiency. Because of my inexperience leading devised applied theater work, I did not communicate my intentions for the initial script of to the cast clearly. Instead of creating a devised play based on the script, one which would implicate the cast and display our collective convictions about the material, we blocked the script as it was written. Nevertheless, as we analyzed the data in the script through embodiment, it became apparent to me that performance is an ideal medium to communicate grief about the ecosphere and cultivate healthier relationships with Earth. Performance places the human body at the center of the work, which is what audiences expect and crave. Humans, especially in the West, enjoy seeing other humans at the heart of the story because we are anthropocentric. Thus, performance is an ideal medium to depict narratives about ecological justice because, although the main character is Earth, the human body draws witnesses to see themselves as points of focus. In other words, the human body is a point of access for witnesses who may not be able to grasp a narrative that's not inherently anthropocentric. As I engaged with participants' stories, I realized as much as their stories feature the human experience, they also illustrate narratives of Earth. The oppression of the participants was the oppression of the land. Moreover, the social injustices intersect with ecological ones. The challenge of the Western critical ethnodramatist is that issues of ecological justice require the deconstruction, analysis, and reconsideration of anthropocentrism. My sociocultural experience and settler ancestry make it difficult to fathom what it might mean to be equal or secondary to the biosphere. Applied theater techniques offer unique opportunities for critical engagement with data about ecological justice, when the goal of the ethnodramatist is to instigate progression towards biocentrism and Earth-human symbiosis. The data I collected on the Seaway project consists of oral histories regarding a place that can no longer be visited physically. Moreover, it only exists in the participants' memories. Alyssa Rosenberg suggests that sense of place exists as a result of embodied engagement. Thus, by interpreting the data through performance, we are visiting the unvisitable. In the same way, one might verbally share a beloved quote frequently said by a deceased friend in a eulogy. We use the embodied language of Earth to revisit places being grieved. Jane Bacon suggests that embodied movements create a form of landscape. They are awake, vivacious, and representational, just like the ecosphere. The Western compartmentalization of the mind, spirit, and body separates human epistemologies from Earth's bounty and communication. Researching a narrative about Earth using solely human linguistic tools is to ignore the symbiosis with which Earth communicates. It is in the same ways that plant roots communicate through touch, Canadian geese flock in formation, and honeybees dance together, that we must tell the stories of Earth. Embodiment allows humans to experience and communicate data in tandem with Earth ontology, a practice which addresses ecological grief by promoting radical symbiosis. One person I interviewed, James, who had experienced expropriation as a child, said, Many people were upset to the point of, there were many natural deaths following the Seaway by the older people who were part of this big upheaval. They just couldn't. Many of them died, I think, of broken hearts because they just couldn't stand that upheaval in their lives, so they succumbed to it. And that's written about. You can read those stories of people dying relatively quickly after the Seaway. His next sentence, stated without hesitation, was, but the one benefit, though, is that we got a lot of new infrastructure out of it. We got a lot of new infrastructure. I find the juxtaposition of these two statements to be surprising. how can the loss of the elderly be so closely correlated with the benefit of new infrastructure? How can those benefits offset such insurmountable loss? The river people still, after 62 years, desperately try to make sense of the project. Like James, they acknowledge that there is deep sacrifice and ecological grief, but they attempt to somehow offset their experiences of mourning by accounting for positive, primarily colonial capitalist outcomes of the Seaway project. Their grief is highly politicized, and I interpret it to be what philosopher Lisa Kretz calls an outlaw emotion. I speculate that without consciously knowing it, their hearts yearn for a space to acknowledge that there is ecological loss, that their loss was caused by a federal agenda they desperately want to trust, and that it is all right to grieve both of those facts. Applied theater creates a space for politicized eulogies to be shared publicly, which I suspect would be cathartic for the river people. The current COVID-19 pandemic stopped the presentation of my research, which was intended to take place in March. My journey with this research is at a standstill, but it has not concluded. In the post-pandemic, I intend to continue my study regarding the effects of the Seaway. Because I am part of the community I'm researching, I understand the importance of creating spaces where a literacy of ecological grief might be invented and exchanged. These spaces, which applied theater offers, are important because this kind of grief does not only belong to those who procured ecological loss, rather ecological grief is an intergenerational experience. For example, as I heard stories of my community's sacrifices in the past, I understood the reason for my particular childhood education and my kinesthetic experience in my county. In this sense, my life is crafted by the grief of the generations who came before me. Stories like those that belong to my community offer insight into the facets of ecological grief. As instances of ecological loss become more prevalent due to climate change, and ecological grief becomes increasingly central in the emotional endurance of humankind. Thank you so much.